Brian, there's been much debate in the Dáil and on the airwaves this week about the withdrawal of the Protestant Ancillary grant. What questions do you think the government has to answer about the withdrawal of this grant?
Well, I think they need to say publicly why they have deliberately targeted the Protestant schools in the way they have. But the grant that is of contention now is the Ancillary grant, which was given to all free schools in the free scheme, and was also given to these 21 Protestant schools, but not to the Catholic schools. And this loss of about €2.5 million is leading to a lot of financial pressure within these 21 Protestant schools. The questions really that the government needs to answer, I suppose, firstly, why do they do this, given the historical legacy of these schools and the agreement that was forged in the 1960s? Secondly, what is the nature of the Attorney General's advice that has only now come into the public domain, even though we don't know the substance of it, but all we have is the minister's word on it? And why was it the case for the last 40 odd years this advice was never actually implemented? Is he saying that every previous Minister for Education was acting in an unconstitutional way by continuing with the grant? And I think the third issue is this: before he chose to do this, why were there no negotiations or discussions within the Protestant community about this? My personal view is that he didn't understand the substance of what he was doing when he signed off on these cuts in last year's budget. He's only now woken up to the reality of the circumstance that he faces. And I think they're the three fundamental questions that he needs to answer right now. There is a huge problem for Protestant rural schools where I think the financial imposition is much more real. And I hope that some agreement can be found now between the government, and foot up the fact that I raised this in the Dáil this week with our party leader, Enda Kenny, the following day, to give some measure of hope to those 21 schools that they can remain in place. Because I would make the point that in the 1960s there were over 40 of these schools. We're now down to 21. We've seen a reduction of half. And are we going to say that in the next 10 years they'll be down to 10 schools and then 5 schools? I think that would be really bad for educational choice, bad for educational diversity, and bad for good relations that should exist between all of the churches in this country.
And I suppose people would assume that just because these are fee-paying schools that everybody who goes there is wealthy and can afford it, but that's not the case.
It's not the case, because in these 21 schools, even though they are claimed to be fee-paying schools, they take a lot of children in from poorer communities who would not otherwise be able to afford to go there on the basis that they are coming from a family which wouldn't have the fees. So they're not similar to the other schools in the sector. And I made the point in the House this week that when the education partners in this particular sector came to see us earlier this year, they made the point that they have full support. The Catholic fee-paying schools fully support the position of the Protestant fee-paying schools about this, because they understand that the composition and the makeup of the kids from those schools have a particular historical and religious relevance. And I was taken by their comments.
And of course Archbishop Dermot Martin intervened earlier this week as well. What did you make of his comments?
Well, I think they were very strong and very poignant, and he showed great authority in saying publicly what the other schools had been saying publicly for the last number of months. And I was very struck by those remarks, and I think it showed a great degree of maturity on his part to speak on behalf of Roman Catholics who genuinely believe that educational diversity and educational choice is as important to Catholics as it is to Protestants. If we actually believe that the Constitution is about diversity and choice in our education system, we have got to be ensuring that we protect those minorities in the country who, for geographical and other reasons, will not be able to provide a school at every crossroads. And that's why it's important that additional support is given to these schools to remain. So he showed great authority, in my view, and a common sense approach to this. And I think his remarks and the remarks of the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Dublin, Archbishop Neil, really put the government in a very difficult position now. And I will wait to see over the course of the next few days if a response is given to this particular issue. If the response is not given, we will then see how within our parliamentary system here the issue can be brought to a head, because it cannot be allowed to fester. This has far too many and serious consequences, not just for the 21 schools, but also for our standing in Northern Ireland. We cannot say to the Protestants in Northern Ireland, for instance, that the importance of minority rights there is something important to us, when in our own community we are prepared even indirectly to discriminate against these 21 schools. I think it's that important that fundamentally important issue that people need to get their heads around here. Because if this issue is left to fester, if it's left to continue, I think it would lead to a very severe undermining of confidence by the Protestant community in this republic, and that would not be acceptable for my party, and I think for the great majority of politicians and parties in this country.